discipline is in any service, whether it's the Army, Air Force, or Navy. Discipline is the key. And it's the key because you're always operating as a team. A fighter pilot who's getting airborne in a fighter, flying a MiG, he's entirely dependent on the ground crew. Have they done their checks? Have they done everything? एक बंदे ने कुछ भी गड़बड़ कर दी, that aircraft going to go into the ground, the guy could be dead. So your life is as dependent on your own survival skills as it is also on the people around you. Without that discipline, you had it. Because उसके बिना तो आप कुछ कर भी नहीं सकते. So how do you structure? How do you this thing? What are your basic strategies? What Kautilya is talking about are the objectives, and how to. He's not giving you. They do give you this. If you look at the entire writings of Kautilya, of course, he's writing vis-a-vis that particular time. He's talking about battlements. He's talking about certain things in a certain manner. But with the changing of the technology, all that has gone out. But the basic principle remains the same. The structure changes. So these things don't change, and it's not just Kautilya. I mean, even the Chinese philosophy of warfare, about guerrilla warfare, everything. Certain things will never change. That's your base. उसके ऊपर आप करते रहिए जो आपको करना है. So those things are not going to change, and to understand that, combined with the geography of the land and your basic resources and how you're going to, it's actually a knowledge game. The more you understand, the more you're capable of doing things.
Namaste sir, myself Niyati Patel from CAC branch, Indus University. I welcome you to the Indus University on the behalf of ICAS Club. Thank you so much for sharing such an informative talk on the military history of India. With your due permission, can we start this conversation?
Certainly, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you for having me here.
Okay, so my first question is that what we have heard and seen about you is that you have a very diverse experience on the subcontinents, subsequently as a military historian. Also, how much important was it from your perspective to know about the terrain where most of the wars have been fought?
Well, I've always believed that military history without military geography actually has very little meaning. For us to understand the lay of the land is not only vital, it is absolutely essential. And this is actually true for every walk of life, even if you're not just looking at it from a military point of view. It's always good to understand where you are, what are the people, what are their cultural things, etc. Because all this adds up in the understanding of the terrain. I've been fortunate. I was born in an army family. My father, by nature, was he was always pushing me. What is this tree? What is this river? What is this mountain? Ye kya hai? Kya hai? So, and we were exposed to a lot. As a young kid, I was mainly in Dehradun initially, but we were going to Nifa in Arunachal. Nifa was Arunachal. My father was posted, हम सब जाते थे. And constantly we were out trying to see the ground. उन दिनों में life was a little different. We used to shoot a lot of partridge and murgi, and so we knew कि यहाँ पे नाला है, यहाँ पे ये है, इधर से ये होगा. So that habit was ingrained at a very early age. In Dehradun, I knew every nook and corner by the time I was even 10. कि इस एरिया में हाथी निकलते हैं तो यहाँ पे ये होता है तो ये होता है. So this knowledge helps. And later, as I started getting more and more into my professional life, my initial job was in Ladakh, where we opened up all the major passes. I'm talking about 1981, when I joined a company called Tiger Tops. And the main thing was they wanted to bring tourism into India. Tiger Tops Nepal existed, in a big way, but wildlife tourism, adventure tourism was all being combined, and it was a new field. So I joined them, and my job was opening up new trekking routes. Now, these new trekking routes are also the old routes taken by various during various military campaigns. For example, there is a pass which links up the Kishtawar Valley in Kashmir with the Zanskar Valley in Ladakh, which was taken by Zorawar Singh, जो गुलाब सिंह के general थे, and he is the man who annexed Ladakh. So in 1981, I was given the task of getting across Humasil. अब वो बात अलग है कि किसी ने हमको ये नहीं बताया कि जो भी उस पास को क्रॉस करेगा वो जरूर मरेगा. That was the legend. Because after Zorawar Singh himself had lost 30 men on the pass. It's not a very high pass, it's at about 17, 18,000 feet, but it's a very dangerous pass. And when we got there, we nobody had told me this. And when we got there, I almost actually got killed because I actually slipped very badly on the Zanskar side. उस दिनों में क्या होता था, Zanskaris would come up to one point, leave their stuff, and the Muslim population from this side would come, take the stuff, but nobody used to cross. So when we crossed, we came into this area. So all this, the knowledge of the terrain, getting to know it. So later when one was dealing with the history of Kashmir, the annexation of Ladakh, for example, how the fighting, etc., unfolded, I'd walked all that. I'd not only walked it, slept there, what are the problems? What does high altitude really mean? How cold does it get? When you read about it, it doesn't make sense unless you've experienced it. So military history from that perspective gave me a tremendous feel for it. Even 62, the Chinese War, my father was part of two Rajput. As a 3-month-old baby, my mother was at Teju. और वहाँ के जो राजा थे, कामती राजा, he had built a hut for us, etc. So we were living right there. And of course, I was too small to remember that. But just to give you an example, for me, the whole subcontinent's been home. I'm as comfortable in Nagaland as I am in, let's say, Mizoram or Tamil Nadu. My dad was in Wellington here. Gujarat, आप कहीं भी हमको ले जाइए. So knowing the terrain helps a lot. Now, when I was doing the 65 book, I was not familiar with the Ran of Kutch at all. I had never been there. I'd been there while filming with the Air Force, I'd flown fighters over it, but I had not actually been on the ground in the Ran of Kutch. So 65 book jab we were starting work on it, I was starting work on it, I came to Ahmedabad. Ahmedabad is the home of 11th Division and it was being commanded by a Rajput officer. So he gave me a detachment, he gave me a gadi. I wanted to see where the fighting initially started in 65 at Kanjar Kot. Kanjar Kot is a fort which is now inside Pakistan, but it's on the western fringes of the Ran of Kutch. So जब हम रन पे पहुंचे हैं तो I've never seen anything like it. It's a dead sea, you see. It used to be the old basin of the Indus, for example. वहाँ पे ये BSF के बंदे थे और वो पानी था और very saline water. वहाँ पे flamingos, these kind of wading birds are there. But otherwise, it's absolutely desolate country. So this BSF chap, he looks at me and he says, "Saab ji, आप जरा," he was a Sardar chap. He said, "साहब जी, तुसी अपने बूट उतारो जरा." So I took off my shoes and he put a chair and he said, "Sir, ये पानी में just keep your feet in it for 10 minutes. That's all I'm asking you to do." So I took off my boots and I put it in that water. It's not a deep thing, it's very shallow. And after 10 minutes, I took my foot out and it was black in color. He says, "Sir, this is the kind of conditions we are living in." And then you realize the salinity of the soil. Now you can read about it, etc. But when you're looking at your foot, the same color as my socks, I mean, it was almost like black, jet black. Then you realize, my God, these chaps have to live with this, fight in this kind of terrain. Then you understand the temperature. He says, "Saab, it goes up to 50 degrees. This is what happens. This is what happens." Then you try and correlate the situation. When you correlate those situations, then you start understanding what is going on. 62 book again, I think when I was researching it, it took me almost 30 years. I went to every valley where the fighting had taken place. And I should just go and sit there. And people used to say, I sometimes tell these guys, pick me up after 2 hours. Or if I got a helicopter or something, I'd go land there and say, just leave me here. Just go away. I want to just sit here. And I would sit in those bunkers where the fighting had taken place, and somehow the ground speaks to you. आपको बाद में कोई नहीं बोल सकता कि उधर से अटैक आया था जब वहां पे कुछ है ही नहीं. There's a cliff over there. They can't come from that side. The only place you can come from is there. So the ground starts to tell its own story. And then you correlate all this. And when you are writing about it and then you're putting it all together, it makes a lot of difference. So having a complete overall perspective of what happened in the subcontinent, I think I've been, two counts I've been very fortunate. One, I was pressed by my own father. यहाँ पे ये बैटल हुई थी, ये हुआ था यहाँ पे, the Delhi Sultanate was here. So history for me has been very alive. It has not been a textbook thing. And the ability to then correlate it to the ground has perhaps given me a deeper understanding of the subject and the best grounding I could have possibly hoped for.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your perspective. So my next question is कि एज ए स्टूडेंट हमारी लाइफ में डिसिप्लिन एक बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट रोल प्ले करता है और उसी डिसिप्लिन को डे टू डे लाइफ में मैनेज करना भी हमारे लिए उतना ही डिफिकल्ट हो जाता है. तो हाउ मच डिसिप्लिन प्लेज एन इम्पॉर्टेंट रोल इन द लाइफ ऑफ अ सोल्जर एंड हाउ डू दे मैनेज टू सस्टेन इन द चेंजिंग एटमॉस्फेयर?
Well, discipline is in any service, whether it's the Army, Air Force, or Navy. Discipline is the key. And it's the key because you're always operating as a team. A fighter pilot who's getting airborne in a fighter, is flying a MiG, is entirely dependent on the ground crew. Have they done their checks? Have they done everything? एक बंदे ने कुछ भी गड़बड़ कर दी, that aircraft going to go into the ground, the guy could be dead. So your life is as dependent on your own survival skills as it is also on the people around you. Without that discipline, you had it. Because उसके बिना तो आप कुछ कर भी नहीं सकते हो. 2002, I think it was, I made this film on the National Defense Academy called The Standard Bearer. This film was an eye-opener for me also. It's an education. When you're shooting an institution, it's not that you know everything about it. So you go there and you learn. So when I was shooting the film, they have something called a Josh Run. Now the Josh Run is something which takes place over 45 kilometers. जब वो ये तो नेशनल डिफेंस एकेडमी में, जब ये यहाँ से इंडियन मिलिट्री एकेडमी जाते हैं वहां पे दे रन द जोश रन अगेन एट 75 किलोमीटर. ना इसकी खसूसियत ये है कि इसमें जब ये भागते हैं दे रन एज स्क्वाड्स, दे डोंट रन एज इंडिविजुअल्स. इट इज नॉट कि आप फर्स्ट आ गए, सेकंड आ गए, थर्ड आ गए. एंड व्हेन यू आर रनिंग एज अ स्क्वाड, यू आर रनिंग एट द पेस ऑफ द वीकेस्ट गाय. The slowest guy is going to actually determine the speed of the squad. So everybody works very hard to get that weak link to go at the same pace as everybody else does. If 30 of you, 15 of you, 20 of you running together, you have to make sure that जो सबसे end में आएगा, he has to run the fastest. Even animals do that. Even wolf packs are designed like that. Even when fish move in shoals, they work like that. The moment there is a weakling, it is immediately sidelined and it's immediately hit by a predator and it's over. In the army, that discipline has to be second nature. That's one aspect. The second thing in the armed forces is that everything is based on commands. You are senior to me by one number, it's enough. I will serve you for the rest of my life. आप बोलोगे, get up, I have to get up. You can't say, hey, yaar, तू मेरे से, what are you talking about? There's no time for that. In combat, an order is given, move right, you move right. If you say move left, you move left. Even if you get hit, too bad. You have to have that hierarchy and it has to be unquestioning and it has to be absolutely driven by a kind of a loyalty which is absolutely amazing. And discipline, again, also banks a lot on leadership and on the fact that the individual's capabilities. If an officer is weak, the squad is going to collapse. The officer always has to lead from the front. The whole business of leading from the front is because the men have to know that, look, I can run faster than you, I can jump higher than you, I can do this. I will not depend on you for your survival, you will depend on me for my survival. So it's a very complex and a very tightly knit kind of a scenario. You are so dependent on each other that I've flown a lot with the Air Force. I've done almost 200, 300, 400 fighter sorties. And I have seen how it works because you are flying at tremendous speeds. आप बोइंग में जाते हो तो if you hit 1,000 kilometers an hour, you are still below the sound barrier. We chaps, I mean, with the Air Force, I have flown. I've been in sorties where we've gone way past the sound barrier. We've gone to, say for example, the MiG-25, the Foxbat flies at 3 times the speed of sound. It goes to heights of 1,20,000 feet. A Boeing goes up till only about 35, just to give you an idea. So you're talking about heights which are almost 4 times. These guys are so trained in combat that you actually have no time to think. In 1965, one of the first pilots who shot down a Pakistani Sabre was a chap called Trevor Keeler. Trevor died. His brother Denzel also. The two Keeler brothers were very famous in 65. They were flying Nats. They shot down the Sabres. Trevor was a good friend of mine, and I was interviewing him once, I was talking to him once, and I asked him, I said, Trevor, he was describing, we did this, that guy turned right, I shot behind him, I did this, I did this. I asked him, I said, what are you thinking at that moment? Do you remember that? He said, we don't think. There's no time to think. All the years of training, the discipline, everything has to kick in at that moment because there is no time. There is just absolutely no time to start thinking कि भैया अगर मैं ये करूँगा तो ये होगा. You just have to do it. And you've been trained. That's why they fly day in and day out, day in and day out. Because when that moment comes, you have to react instinctively. Even in Kargil, one used to see it. When the troops are moving forward, it's not just the troops. Discipline is not something which is restricted only to the armed forces. I think everybody in this country needs it. And in times of crisis, and I've seen this during the Kargil War, I used to be very vocal about this. Forget about the soldiers. Every truck driver, every porter, they're all civilians. They'd all come there to help during the war. Everybody was moving forward. And at that time, they found the discipline amongst themselves. वो बोला 5 बजे आप आ जाओ सुबह आपको 4 बजे सुबह ये ब्रिज क्रॉस करना है कोई नहीं बोलेगा कि मेरी नींद नहीं खुलेगी या ये नहीं होगा वो नहीं होगा because you are all then a part of a system and you are operating even when you are in college that discipline comes from within. I mean, if the entire class is going to be disciplined, you will also be disciplined. There'll be one or two odd fellows who start misbehaving. Oh, ha ha, hoo में सारा discipline collapse हो जाता है. This fun is one thing, but a breakdown of discipline is something which we actually cannot afford to let. We all go through it. We all go through our phases in life where, especially when you come out of school, when everything is so regimented, everything is controlled. घंटी बजती है आप भागो स्कूल में. कॉलेज आते हैं कोई पूछेगा नहीं अगर आप क्लास नहीं आए तो ठीक है क्या फर्क पड़ता है आप ही के मार्क्स आएंगे. Nobody is going to ask you. So for a semester, 2 semesters, your life falls apart. Then you realize कि हो क्या रहा है. Then that self-discipline has to come back and you have to kick yourself back into shape. It's the key. Discipline is not just restricted to soldiers. The day we discipline ourselves in every little thing, we make a quantum difference. And one thing, please keep in mind that every individual, it doesn't have to be in uniform. You're all part of national security. I'll give you one more example before to answer your question. When the Kandahar hijacking took place, what happened? We made a lot of noise about Pakistani involvement, this, that, etc. हुआ क्या? पाकिस्तान ने कहा अरे अब क्या बात कर रहे हो ये पांचों के पास हिंदुस्तानी पासपोर्ट्स है. अब वो पासपोर्ट्स आए कहां से? Some tout in Bombay or in Delhi or wherever they got the passports, I think it was Bombay, was paid 5,000 rupees. उसने कहा मैं आपके पासपोर्ट बना देता हूँ. वो तो धंधा कर रहा है ना. वो तो उससे बात करो बोलेगा मेरे बाप ने भी पासपोर्ट बनवाए थे मेरे बेटा भी पासपोर्ट बनवाएगा मैं भी पासपोर्ट बनवाऊंगा. He doesn't think he is doing anything wrong. वो तो कहता है कि this is my livelihood. But that break in discipline by one character, when the chips are down, suddenly the entire country's case falls apart. So the illustrating point here is that all of us are vital cogs in that wall of national security. उसमें आप एक दिन का निकाल लीजिए पूरा का पूरा बैठ जाएगा. So it's absolutely critical. And we don't have to think that only the armed forces is, discipline is important to them. Left, right marching is not discipline. Discipline is being able to get up every morning, to be able to react at that moment the way you've been trained to do, and without any, you know your place in that overall chain, which is true for life. So the day you realize that, you're there.
Thank you so much, sir. My another question is that since independence, which are the major forts or wars that have taken place?
Post independence, we've been virtually fighting non-stop. Even today, if you think that we don't, there's nothing great happening, we are sadly mistaken. We have troops deployed in Siachen. Every night you have patrols going out in Kashmir, uh, Manipur, Nagaland, everywhere. There are troops on the move. They're sitting the whole night with black paint on their faces, with weapons in this cold. Right now, we're in the middle of winter. Believe me, it can be really terrible. But day in, day out, our troops have been deployed somewhere or the other, fighting various operations. The immediate ones which come to mind are that 1947-48, we were immediately after partition. The army was deployed initially for the partition itself, the Punjab boundary force. After that, they were immediately pushed into action in Kashmir when the Pakistani raiders came in, and 1947-48 का जो हुआ एक साल की severe fighting took place. What is lesser known is that there were certain actions. There was the Kathiawar landings in Gujarat, where after the Junagadh state had Bhutto ke father was the prime minister. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was later Pakistan's prime minister and foreign minister earlier. 65 war mein he was the foreign minister of Pakistan. His father was the prime minister of Junagadh, and he had initiated that they had actually opted for Pakistan. And then they had these Junagadh landings, the Kathiawar landings, etc. So that was one operation. The Hyderabad Operation Polo took place next because the Razakars had to be neutralized, and that was fought by the Indian Army. Then in 1950s, there was a lot of fighting in Nagaland. Nagaland insurgency was being supported by China in a big way. उसके बाद आपका क्या हुआ था? उसके बाद आपका गोवा का हुआ था liberation, where that was a full-fledged operation, including the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army. Then came the 62 war, where we were up against China. We didn't acquit ourselves very well in 62. Immediately followed by the 65 war with Pakistan, which was fought over a year. I mean, first the run of Kutch, then Opera Blaze took place, then the fighting in Kargil, then they came in as raiders, then, the fighting in Cham Joria, then the fighting in Lahore sector, Sialkot sector, etc., etc. 65 के बाद आपका, there was another very important action which took place, which happened at Nathula, where the Chinese के साथ we had the barbed wire incident, where the first conflict after the 62 war happened. So the 67 incident in Nathula, which is in Sikkim, happened. 67 के बाद there was the 71 war, where Bangladesh was created and Pakistan got sliced into half. 71 के बाद India was actually saw a relative period of stability till we came till the early 1980s, where Punjab started to flare up. The Siachen Glacier fighting started in 1984. The entire insurgency in Punjab, उसके पहले आपका वो मिजोरम, लाल डेंगा and all that, again all funded by China. There's been incidents upon incidents upon incidents, and then the whole IPKF stuff happened because we, for the first time, decided to even go into Sri Lanka to protect the Tamil Tigers. But initially, we landed up fighting them. So there was a lot of stuff around that. And this continued till 1999. We were, when the Pakistanis came into Kargil, they occupied certain heights thinking we won't do anything about it. But we did. So 1999, we then kicked them out again. We all know about Kargil. There's been a lot written about it, a lot said about it. It has simply carried on because Kashmir the real problem in the valley started in 1989 and it continued, and it has continued all along. And then we've been through various conflict situations. The Northeast has been on a boil almost throughout. Not so much on a boil because actually things are a lot more stable also, but Manipur started to play up a lot. Um, and then, of course, we've had all this trouble with China on the northern border since 2020. गलवान, उसके पहले डोकलम का भी जो इशू हुआ था. So it's a very long chronological list, but the list is only focusing on the actual conflicts which we are aware of. The army and the Air Force and the Navy have been actually involved in a lot of other lesser known incidents, but it has almost been continuous. And to the credit of our armed forces and the men, they have never let us down, except for 62, where things really went wrong. I think our armed forces has acquitted ourselves extremely well. That's a long list.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering my questions.
Hello, sir. Myself Darshil Doshi. I'm studying in BTech CSE in Indus University. I also have a very few questions. With your due permission, I shall ask.
Please, go ahead.
So my first question is, we all know about the Kautilya's 4 ways of diplomacy, that is Sam, Dam, Dand and Bhed. Are these ancient ways of war are still relevant today, and how you see them in the India's military?
See, it's actually it's a very good question because it comes down to actually ethics, and it comes down to even in all the principles of war. What are they really talking about? They're talking about what is right, what is wrong, which is the strategy, what is this, what is that. These basic principles don't change. Technology changes, right? You may be talking what Kautilya talks about vis-a-vis archers, vis-a-vis foot cavalry, vis-a-vis elephants, is replaced later by infantry, tanks, whatever. These principles are vital. They don't, as I said, they don't change. They are perennial. It is like these are the main pillars on which your basic foundations are built. Those pillars keep changing in their composition because warfare changes. Today, the way we understand war may already be over. We don't know. We see in Ukraine what is going on. We see what is happening. We are now entering an era where drones and artificial intelligence is going to be a very major part of warfare. Warfare may not even be fought in the contemporary sense of going and killing someone. Warfare may be just switching off your mobile phones and taking over your entire system by jamming your systems. The more reliant we are getting on technology, the more vulnerable also we are becoming because so warfare is already changing. If you were to describe the way we fight wars today to somebody in World War II, he would be looking at you as if you're talking about science fiction, right? Similarly, if you look at anything, it's not just warfare. If we were to go from Ahmedabad, where we are sitting and talking right now, to Delhi, in our own grandfather's time, it would take him 3 months. Or great grandfather's time. Grandfather's time, it would take him 3 days because यहाँ ट्रेन पकड़ के जाना पड़ता था. अभी हम सोचते भी नहीं है, हम फ्लाइट में बैठते हैं, ठक से वो भी इन एंड वी आउट. वी डोंट इवन बॉदर टू लुक एट द टेरेन नाउ कि नीचे क्या है, कौन से पहाड़ जा रहे हैं, कौन सी नदी जा रही है, हमको पता ही नहीं है. एक एयरपोर्ट टर्मिनल 1, टर्मिनल 2, दैट्स इट. कि वहाँ ओला मिलेगी, हाँ जी मिल जाएगी, ये हो जाए. So things are changing all the time. But the basic principles can never change, right? How do you structure, how do you this thing, what are your basic strategies? What Kautilya is talking about are the objectives and how to, he's not giving you, they do give you this, if you look at the entire writings of Kautilya, of course, he's writing vis-a-vis that particular time, he's talking about battlements, he's talking about certain things in a certain manner. But with the changing of the technology, all that has gone out, but the basic principle remains the same, the structure changes. So these things don't change. And it's not just Kautilya. I mean, even, the Chinese philosophy of warfare, about guerrilla warfare, everything, certain things will never change. That's your base. उसके ऊपर आप करते रहिए जो आपको करना है. So those things are not going to change. And to understand that, combined with the geography of the land and the your basic resources and how you're going to, uh, it's actually a knowledge game. The more you understand, the more you're capable of doing things. That's why in the armed forces they study like hell. So every level, it is nothing but study, study, study. It never ends. The education, staying abreast with the enemy is as important as anything else.
Thank you, sir, for answering that. My next question is, we see that in various countries like Israel and Singapore, there is a compulsory military training given to the youth population. Do you feel that if this strategy should also be implemented in India, as India has such a large amount of youth population?
I'm not sure if that really applies to India because we have the largest standing voluntary army in the world, I think. I'm not sure what the US uh, size of the army is nowhere near that, but in terms of voluntary army means that these are all people who have opted to go to the armed forces on their own. Whether they are short service commission or they are Agniveers or whether they're this, that, nobody's putting a gun on your head. So drafting is not an issue here at the moment. One of the major arguments put forward by people who are in favor of drafting is exactly this. It will discipline the person. But there are other ways of disciplining people. You don't necessarily discipline a guy by putting him in uniform. उसके बाद आप यूनिफॉर्म उतार दो फिर बोलो वो डाकू बन गया क्योंकि अब वो यूनिफॉर्म गलत हो गई. In India, we don't have a problem. For every one soldier who's being recruited, you have about 100 people applying. And there's no shortage of people wanting to get into the armed forces because even now, today, Sarkari Naukri is something which drives them to join the armed forces, perhaps, in a lot of cases. A lot of them want to serve the country, etc., is different. But the way the armed forces selects, they generally pick people who are very motivated. They have a very, very thorough system of evaluating you. They will look at you, they will see your mindset. That SSB thing is actually quite an art. So they, as it is, they weed out a lot of people. But yes, there are a certain element who do get in because they simply want a job and सरकारी नौकरी है and मेरी तनख्वाह आ जाएगी और मेरा ये हो जाएगा वो हो जाएगा. लेकिन the moment you join the armed forces, this whole business of comradeship, about the whole training process, etc., it knocks off that element also. Then you are getting more. The country comes first is may sound like a, a slogan or something like that, but no, it's not. It's a way of life because there you cannot afford for any other thing to come into play. In India's case, I do not feel that we need drafting because drafting has its own issues. You land up with the youth who have uh, given. I mean, if you go to soldiering, is a serious business. I mean, it's a evolving process. A lieutenant doesn't think the same way as a captain. A captain then evolves into a major. You can't take a guy and say, okay, I'm putting a colonel's pips on you. Start thinking like that. There's a whole process. So the armed forces is a very serious step by step progression. In the case of drafting, what happens is you are taking people and you know that they're not going to get onto that ladder. They will serve for a few years and then they'll go off. So you're doing two things, in my opinion. One is you are taking away 2-3 years compulsorily when he can be. A guy who wants to become an aeronautical engineer, how does it matter to him? Does he have to really go and serve and sit in the Himalayas to prove his point? No, you're taking 3 vital years away from his life. When you don't have that compulsion, you don't need to do it. So in India's case, we don't need it. We have excellent structures here. It's a matter of, in some places we use it very well. Like NCC is a very good thing. If you really want to instill discipline, everything, etc., I think NCC needs to be given a major leg up. Right now, all the schools where you have NCC cadets, they are there for functions. उनको uniform में पढ़ा दिया, थाटू करने के लिए गार्ड वाला बना दिया. That is not what we are really looking at. We should be actually, NCC was created as a different body. It was supposed to toughen up people and do social work and all kinds of things. We need to do that a lot more. Even paramilitaries, everything, the whole structure is there. As of today, I don't think we need to really be looking at drafting at all. The concept of Agniveer, yes, that's a separate issue. The government had certain thoughts around it. Let's see how it pans out. It's too early to comment on it at this stage. You would know how successful or not successful it is somewhere down the line. Because you see, there is a precedent to this. A lot of officers, Agniveer, of course, is for men, but a lot of officers who are generally commissioned through the Indian Military Academy. There's also a certain lot who come through the OTA in Chennai, and there's another academy like that in Gaya, I think. So now, what happens to them after 5 years? Most of them opt to stay on. But if there's no place for him, he'll be told to go back to civilian life. But uska बेचारे का क्या होगा? You can say I'm giving him a corpus of money, this, that, etc. But if that guy has to then become let's say, become a work in a particular field, then he's behind everybody else who's already got a jump start on him. So everybody is doing their job, and so long as you don't need to be able to make it compulsory, why do it? Especially European countries having done it, their problem's very different over there. They have an issue of people not wanting to join the armed forces or just not having enough numbers. So for Israel, it's a matter of survival. With the case of a lot of the European countries, they simply, to get those numbers, they have to have drafting. We don't have that problem.
Thank you, sir. My next question is, we would like to hear from you about the ongoing conflicts on Kashmir, and I have a question that if the military is given a full control over Kashmir, will they able to solve the ongoing conflicts in them?
See, firstly, this business about giving full control, we are not a dictatorship. And in the Indian scenario, it is the military is a arm. It's yet another arm of governance which actually implements the will of the government, right? The government of the day. You do not give free hand to armed forces, because if you give hand to armed forces, there's invariably going to be anarchy. The rifle is a very dangerous thing. Okay, if it's used properly with discipline, it's a fantastic weapon. Take the discipline away, that same guy becomes a daku in uniform. He becomes a bandit. He's out of control. In the Indian Army, the checks and balances are so severe. That's the difference between the Indian and the Pakistani Army, actually. We have officers at every stage. Even at the platoon level, at a post, you'll always have an officer there. The sense of responsibility, the sense of accountability is a lot more than in any other army in the world. If you see our own casualties, in Kargil and all, our officer casualties are very high. In the valley, etc., it's the officers who take the bullets first. So you are not just saying, "Okay." Now you hear a lot that politicians have ruined this. This is what has happened. A lot of money has been corrupted in this area. कश्मीर में ये हो गया, वो हो गया, आर्मी को फ्री हैंड दे दो. फ्री हैंड दे दो, फिर करोगे क्या? You may create terror for a while, but your casualties of the non-combatants. You see, the thing is, when you're fighting insurgency, why is it so difficult? Because if you're firing at me, you're firing at me from a crowd. I can't fire back into that crowd. Now, if I kill the person on your left or the person on your right, I've had it. I mean, I've lost the war, because that's your objective. You want to fire at me and you want the person next to you to get shot, who becomes collateral damage. So I think the way we have handled insurgency, especially in Nagaland, especially in Manipur, Mizoram, in the early years, some of it has been, a little, because they were very remote areas. The army, you could say, had a free hand, especially in Nagaland in the 50s. The repercussions of that are not very good, because the Naga people have not forgotten the fact that the army came and burnt the village. The innocent guy is always going to remember, ना मैंने तो कुछ नहीं किया था, मेरा घर आपने आके क्यों जला दिया? We have fought insurgency in Kashmir. We have fought insurgency in the Northeast. We have fought insurgency in the South. We fought it in Punjab. But the armed forces has fought it being very aware of two things. A, that you are fighting your own people. Even if help is coming from across the border, whatever it is, they are firing at you from within your own people. The armed forces has taken the casualties, and we've lost men in the process. I mean, you will obviously have higher casualties because he's firing at you first. But I think what the Indian armed forces has done, and that's why we are also very different from other countries. In other countries, China, you won't even know what the casualties are. In the Indian side, we can't hide our casualties. गलवान में 20 आदमी मर गए तो अब 20 आदमी मर गए. कौन थे, उनके नाम क्या थे, कौन सी पलटन था, वो सब आ जाएगा. चाइना में क्या कैजुअलिटीज थी आपको आज तक नहीं पता, कभी पता भी नहीं चलेगी क्योंकि वो बताएंगे नहीं. पाकिस्तान में भी वो दबा देते हैं, वो तो अपने सोल्जर्स को नहीं एडमिट करते. In Kargil during the war, I was part of that team which returned their bodies, etc. I've seen it. We are not talking about theory. We're talking about reality. So giving anybody a free hand is a very dangerous thing, and it's definitely not worth doing because our system is a tired system. You have the government of the day, which is the civil government, which gives the orders. You have to follow it. That acts as a check and balance also in the larger perspective.
Thank you, sir, for answering all my questions.
Thanks a lot.